Capcom vs SNK 2 is one of the most beloved fighting games of all time. It's not only a celebration of the two biggest rivals in the genre, but a perfect send-off of a decade's worth of fighting game design to cap off the new millennium. And that's why the game is still played competitively over 20 years later. SNK vs Capcom, SVC Chaos on the other hand, is a game that, exists. Look, I know my whole shtick is being positive about fighting games, but people didn't like this game when it first came out, and now, 20 years later in an age where so many fighting games are being re-examined and gaining newfound appreciation and scenes, people still don't really like this game. But it can't be that bad, right? Well, let's check out SVC Chaos and explore why this surefire crossover flopped hard. In the late 90s, the head of development for SNK, Takashi Nishiyama, met with the head of development of Capcom, Yoshiki Okamoto, to discuss putting their company's pride to the side and collaborate on crossover titles using each other's IPs, which sounds like a very far-fetched what-if conversation that somehow thankfully became reality. The two coin-up giants would enter a collaborative deal, and Capcom would immediately make the obvious choice that every fighting game fan wanted by putting out an arcade fighting game crossover, aptly named Capcom vs SNK, in arcades, so players could finally see the epic Ryu vs Kyo battle they've always dreamed of. SNK, however, went a different route with their part of the deal, cause they ditched the arcades with their crossover titles. You see, SNK had just released their foray into the handheld market with the Neo Geo Pocket, and they needed some killer apps if they were ever gonna beat Nintendo. So they used the collab to release SNK vs Capcom, Card Fighters Clash, which is a Pokemon-inspired card battler that's one of my favorite games of all time. But come on, this isn't what the SNK fans were clamoring for. The Capcom developed crossover fighters are obviously great games, but they're still very Capcom coded. King of Fighters players aren't clamoring to play CVS2 just because you can short hop. Iori was here, but this was definitely a Capcom flavored Iori. So SNK fans wanted their own SNK flavored Ryu, and they eventually got one on the Neo Geo Pocket again. Yep, SNK dropped their crossover fighter, SNK vs Capcom, the match of the millennium, as a portable game. And despite not being the arcade title SNK fans probably wanted, this game does still rule, and I'll definitely have to talk about it along with the other Neo Geo Pocket fighters at some point. But I just know some SNK diehards were bitter at the game centers watching the Capcom kids have fun with their characters. The dream of seeing an arcade SNK developed crossover fighter was becoming bleak though, because not too long after the release of Capcom vs SNK 2, SNK themselves declared bankruptcy. The company had spread itself way too thin by trying to manage its game centers while still developing new games for the decade-old Neo Geo hardware, along with their new pieces of hardware, the Hyper Neo Geo 64, and again, the Neo Geo Pocket, which both didn't meet expectations whatsoever. The Neo Geo Pocket is still one of the coolest handhelds ever, but sadly no one can take on Nintendo in the portable market. Also, fighting games were waning in popularity, so SNK had a lot going against them. The defunct SNK would start licensing out its series to different developers, before eventually getting acquired by their affiliate Playmore, becoming the newly formed SNK Playmore. And what better way to mark this triumphant return than by finally capitalizing on that crossover deal with Capcom they still somehow had, years later. So, let's finally take a look at the long-awaited SNK developed Capcom arcade crossover, SVC Chaos. And I mean, literally look. Cause it's immediately noticeable that this game really set off to make itself different from Capcom's crossovers. The word chaos in the title is definitely fitting, cause this game's aesthetic is dark and moody, which is an atmosphere that SNK had dabbled in before, but not to this extent. Every stage is desolate and depressing, with a very muted color palette accompanied by a very subdued song. There is definitely no "this is true love we're making" in this OST. The characters themselves also look weird and seemingly realistic, mostly because the coloring and shading on these sprites is a lot more grittier and darker than usual, which ends up making them look more human to me, for better or worse. I think characters like Shiki and Balrog look fantastic here, even though he's just traced over from Heavy D's sprite. But I've never really liked how any of the Capcom Shotos looked in this game, cause they look awkwardly lanky to me. And this Guile sprite has always given me tonal whiplash, cause I think SVC Chaos's detailed style just makes you realize how dumb his hair actually is. Especially cause it's even more exaggerated than usual here. But on the flip side, I've always loved the exaggerated proportions of this Sagat, cause he looks like an absolute monster in a way Capcom has never really made him look. SVC Chaos's presentation is probably the most discussed aspect of the game, cause you either hate it or think it's kinda interesting. And I definitely used to hate it growing up, and thought it was straight up ugly, but I've come around to find it weirdly charming with age, and I especially appreciate the character artwork by Nona, cause they're so extremely stylized. It's honestly some of my favorite fighting game key art in general. SVC Chaos could have been bombastic and colorful, but Capcom already did that, on much more powerful hardware. So I think this stylistic departure was needed to really give the game its own identity. A strange and eerie identity that probably wouldn't have been my first choice personally, but you can't deny its jarring uniqueness. And I think this different line of thought led to the character choices here as well. Capcom vs SNK was basically Street Fighter vs KOF for the most part, which is not a bad thing, but this kind of forced SNK into a corner if they wanted to differentiate their cast. Cause all that was left were the weirdos. Sure, we still have our King of Fighters staples and basic Street Fighter 2 picks, but we also got characters like Earthquake and Hugo, which are solid B-sides you wouldn't necessarily think of as a first pick in a crossover. But it only gets better with characters like Shiki from Sam Show 64 and Tessa from Red Earth, or Mars People from Metal Slug and Firebrand from Ghost and Goblins, and even Princess Athena and Zero, who actually made his fighting game debut here in his GBA design, and is of course top tier. SVC Chaos's most long-standing contribution to society though, has to be Violent Ken, who made his first playable appearance in this game, and is an homage to the psycho brainwashed Ken from the Street Fighter 2 animated movie. An evil, disturbed version of one of the most popular fighting game characters ever was always going to be cool. But the best part about Violent Ken is that he's actually super fun. More Shotos need stupidly strong command dashes. Also, it's kinda crazy that this is technically an SNK character, but he ended up in the Capcom developed Ultra Street Fighter 2 14 years later with the same moveset. And he ruled there too, so let's keep bringing this dude back. But pushing Violent Ken and even Zero to the side, I just want to shout out SNK's depiction of Dimitri, cause this sprite is incredible and really makes him look downright devilish. But I can't deny that I'm mostly just hyped because SNK remembered that other characters besides the Darkstalker girls existed. He even still transforms everyone with his Midnight Bliss, which means this is technically the first official appearance of Cutie Terry before SNK heroines, right? And there are even more character transformations when Athena or Firebrand defeat another character. So everyone say hello to Chicken and Kappa Guile. The character selection in this game are all niche choices a fighting game sicko like me appreciates, and I think SVC Chaos's roster is its most endearing strength. Even in 2003, picking a character like Tessa to be in your crossover was pretty out there. SNK did these Capcom characters right for the most part in my opinion. Also just want to highlight that this game went all out with the character interactions, cause every single one of the 36 characters here has unique pre-battle dialogue with every other character. So you can finally see what Akuma would say to an alien. Which leads us to one of the most ridiculous win quotes ever. They'll never let Akuma live this one down. But more importantly, is that none of these character interactions tell us what the hell is going on. Why are we fighting in the apocalypse? Is everyone dead? Characters literally meet and talk to God at the end of arcade mode in this game, and still nothing is revealed. Is this some metaphor for SNK's bankruptcy? But seriously, there's nothing in game, or in the manual, or even in the MOOCs that talk about why things look like this. The best we have is an SVC Chaos Chinese manhwa series that states that the characters are fighting in a tournament in the afterlife. But this probably definitely shouldn't be considered canon, cause it also has panels of Akuma and Mr. Karate riding T-Rexes. But okay, that is pretty cool. We'll just say it's canon. But let's stop beating around the bush. The reason why SVC Chaos isn't all that liked is cause the gameplay is weird. First of all, the game is on the Neo Geo, so it's only got 4 buttons, which covers your light and hard punches and kicks. And a lot of people seem to take offense to this, cause you're reducing the amount of attacks the 6-button Capcom characters usually have. But I think that's a dumb complaint, cause again, it's on the Neo Geo. This hardware only has 4 buttons. What did you expect? But also cause buttons like medium kick for the Shotos are still here, just done differently. This isn't even the first time this has happened either, cause Capcom vs SNK 1 was also a 4-button game, and that was by choice there. They could have used 6 buttons, but didn't. The real issue with SVC Chaos is that it just straight up feels bad. I know that's a shocking statement from Mr. Winquo, but SVC Chaos plays like a bootleg. And I don't even think it's because of how buttons feel when you push them necessarily, but because of the feedback that buttons have on block and hit. Attacks just don't have any impact, almost like they're weightless. This is due to a nasty combo of lack of hit stun, weirdly fast animations, and downright horrible sound design. Seriously, listen to these sound effects. These hits sound downright pathetic, and I don't know what SNK was thinking, cause they would go on to reuse these sound effects in King of Fighters 2003 too. Hearing and seeing SVC Chaos isn't enough to judge though. All it takes is playing one round of this game, and you'll instantly realize something is a bit off here. This isn't similar to how any of the King of Fighters, or Fatal Furies, or even Street Fighter feel. This game just feels cheap and hollow. Also, this is just a random personal gripe, but it has always driven me nuts that multi-hit supers in this game seem to have all of the damage in the first few hits, and then scale back hard at the end. Look at this life bar. Doesn't that just look awkward? But it's not all a lost cause, cause SVC Chaos does have some interesting ideas. SNK ditched running for dashes, and I really like them in this game. They feel nice and snappier than Capcom dashes, and you can cancel the dashes with buttons, which always rules. The main defensive mechanic of the game is also tied around dashes, cause while you're in block stun, you can cancel into a dash with some invulnerability to start or punish pressure. The other cool idea is tied to the super bar. There's technically 3 levels to your bar, but once you build 3 levels, you enter max mode, which puts your bar on a timer that lets you do more supers than usual, while also giving your character new cancels from normals and specials. So you could do some fun stuff like canceling the second hit of Iori's Rekka into DP, or you can go all out and cancel Iori's close D into his hit grab, then cancel into his DP, then cancel that into super. Most cool of all to me though, is that you can even cancel whiff normals into specials, so you can just mash sweep into fireballs. Which looks ridiculous, but honestly it's a fun mechanic. But as cool as these systems are, the most infamous SVC Chaos mechanic has gotta be the fact that whiffing throws costs meter. And as a chronic thrower, well, this sucks. But this might just be the greatest idea ever to dudes stuck in the 90s that think throwing is cheap. So good or not so good ideas aside, the general weird feeling of SVC Chaos just can't be shaken off though. And that's besides the fact that competitively, the game is pretty busted too. The top tiers are very dominant and even have infinites. And this isn't helped by the fact that the boss characters are legal in most tournaments for the game, which I gotta respect, cause if you're grinding this game out seriously, you might as well be playing Shin Akuma and Orochi Iori. While I still don't think this game is my cup of tea, I have grown fonder of it, and I do see why others appreciate the chaotic mess. Despite all of its flaws, this game is still more active on FightCade than most of the games I talk about on this channel, especially in South America. But it's not hard to see that SVC Chaos was a victim of SNK's dire finances at the time. They had literally just escaped bankruptcy and an exodus of their talent leaving the company, and thought that an easy win for them to recoup money was to dust off their contracts with Capcom that they probably didn't have much time left on anyways, only to be met with mediocre sales and bad fan and critic reception. I can only imagine what kind of game we could have gotten if SNK had pushed out an arcade fighter during the late 90s, instead of focusing on their portable titles. But we got what we got, and maybe it's more interesting this way. Despite all that I've said, SVC Chaos is easily accessible to play nowadays, so I'd still give it a shot. Cause at worst, you'll learn more about what you don't like in a fighting game, and at best, you'll become one of the evil top tier players in a FightCade lobby. Thanks.